All right, let's do this. 2023 is coming to a close, and you know what time it is. It's time for us to talk about our predictions for 2024. So in today's video, we're going to talk about what did we see this year? What happened in 2023? There's no doubt this was a crazy year. We've seen things that I never imagined in the last 22 years of being in this business. And now moving forward, what does that mean for 2024? So today's video, market prediction for 2024. I think in order to have a good understanding of where we're headed, we want to talk about what happened in 2023, right? Let's talk about the past and what type of impact that will have on what we see for 2024. I mean, history does have a way of repeating itself, also has a way of shaping what we do in the future. So looking back on 2023, wow, right? What a year. We've seen so many things. You know, at the helm of all of this, inflation was a driving factor, right? So inflation continued to persist. Things were expensive, right? And it still continued into the end of this year. Things are still very expensive, even though now the talk is that inflation is moving in the right direction and we're seeing less than half of the inflationary numbers that we saw this time last year. Things are not any cheaper, right? So we're not feeling that yet, and hopefully that'll be something that we see going into 2024. But inflation, was a driving factor in what we saw this year, and that pushed towards some major events. One of those, the most obvious, was the increase of interest rates, right? As the Feds fought back to try and keep inflation under control, they increased interest rates at a monumental pace, pushing rates up higher than we had seen in decades. And we have started to see some relief from that, which is great news, and hopefully we're going to talk about that continuing in 2024. But going through and looking at that, this year we saw some of the highest rates, and this basically brought the housing market to a screeching halt, right? And I think that was part of what needed to happen here, is that we have a true supply and demand issue, and we needed things to slow down a little bit. Now, how this impact what the ripple effect will look like moving into the next few years will still be determined, but it's definitely, no one can argue that this had a tremendous impact on 2023. If you want to look at the numbers, so there was under 4 million transactions, it looks like, in 2023. So about 3.83 according to the National Association of Realtors. That is compared to over 6.5 million transactions back in 2021. So not quite half as much, but a pretty big drop, almost half. And everyone has felt that in the industry. We saw a lot of compression looking at mortgage companies, right? So if you think about it, half the business is being done, so a lot of companies had to cut staff. This was unfortunate. There were massive layoffs. Companies use terms like right sizing, but it does make sense, right? If you need less people to do a certain job, that's the nature of the business. And we saw that. That also led to some mortgage companies closing their doors, a lot of loan originators not renewing their licenses. I mean, we're at basically 25% of what we saw in the heyday of the height of everyone being a loan officer. So big decrease in that. The good news is that I think going through, and we'll talk about this more, but I think that means there's actually a positive spin on that for what that means for 2024. The real estate industry shook, right? Big lawsuit against the National Association of Realtors. This has made the headlines and has been the talk, basically going through and calling out how a buyer's agent is paid and what that commission looks like, and bringing to light how that impacts a transaction. Now, nothing's really changed. It's just talking about it because, of course, everyone loves talking about money, right? Unfortunately, they don't, which we need to change. More people need to be comfortable with this. But going through and looking at this, that impact still remains to be seen, but we can tell you right now in 2023, this has shook the industry as now these conversations are being had, and both on the consumer side and with different real estate firms, people are talking about how they're going to address this in the future. So that was a big change that we saw. Now, questioning basically how a buyer's agent is paid and how much they should be paid and who should be paying them. So we'll see how that shuffles through going through into 2024. Also, the banking industry took a huge hit. This was the 2023 marks the largest year ever for the collapse in the banking industry. And we saw large banks like First Republic Bank, Silicon Valley Bank, these banks had to shut their doors. Now, going back and talking about inflation, basically what happened is they raised interest rates, they devalued the assets of those banks, and then when people came to get their money, there was no money to pay them, basically. That's oversimplifying, but you get the idea. That resulted in a tremendous issue, obviously causing these banks to shut their doors. That has its ripple effect. There was actually a total of 5 banks that shut their doors. This is the largest year we've ever seen in that. So that was big in 2023. Going through and looking at that now, closing out the year, we've already started to see an uptick in home sales. We just came off of a 5-month slump as far as existing home sales, and we're starting to see that increase. So we're going to talk about what does that look like for 2024. Talking about how the market, what was the market made up of in 2023? So first-time home buyers led the way at about 31% of the market. There were roughly about 27% in cash sales. So you can see that first-time home buyers, some of them using cash. Investor sales down, although up from last year, but still down in comparison, looking to make up roughly about 18% of the transactions for the year. So those are some pretty big statistics, and I expect to see this change going through. So we'll talk about that and look ahead to 2024 and what we're going to see. So that's a lot, right? A lot happened in 2023. Now, what does that mean for the future? What are we predicting for 2024? Let's talk about it. All right, so what do we think is going to happen in 2024? Let's break this down and let's talk about each line item that we discussed in 2023. Inflation has been coming down. This is great news. You know, we saw the recent Fed announcement talking about interest rate cuts into 2024 with as much as now verbal, basically stating blatantly there should be at least 3 cuts. The markets loved this. We saw interest rates come down for the first time in a while, coming out of that high of above 8% down into the mid 6s. I expect to see this continue into 2024, although at a very slow pace, right? We have to move cautiously and see what does this impact have on inflation. Make no mistake, if inflation reverses course and starts to go back up, then we're going to see some changes there. We're also going to have to see what the general consumer sentiment is and how this impacts the housing market. But one thing ending the year and going into 2024 will be lower interest rates than what we saw, at least for a majority of the year for 2023. Now, let's not forget, though, that we did start 2023 with lower interest rates. Actually, the interest rates now are more in line with what we saw in about April of 2023. But I do predict that going into 2024, we should see interest rates most likely in about that mid-6 range. I think that would be a good average. I wouldn't be surprised to see the 7s come back at some point, and I wouldn't be surprised to see things touch the low side of 6, if maybe not dropping just below that. So good news for interest rates. Housing inventory. Now, I think that's still going to be obviously a driving factor and a concern on how many homes can be sold and what we have out there. Supply and demand has been driving that factor. And we end the year with an uptick in inventory, which is great, over 1 million homes on the market. It's a big jump from the 720,000 homes that were on the market only months ago, but still a very large clip below the actual demand. Going through and looking at this, though, the hope is that these lower interest rates may get some people off the sidelines, because right now, a lot of people are not making moves. They're sitting tight because they secured very low interest rates on their homes. So if they don't have to move, they're probably not going to. Some people still are, and there are those people that do have to move, but these lower interest rates will help that, and also hopefully this will motivate some people to try and take that plunge so we can see a bit of an uptick in inventory. As far as the banking industry goes, I'm hoping that we've seen the end of some of the collapse of these banks. I don't think we're out of the woods yet as far as that goes, but I don't expect to see many headlines like we saw for 2023. So moving forward, hopefully there will be stability. That seems to be, I think, at the core for what we're seeing within the mortgage industry and the banking industry. We want to talk about interest rates that are more stable, more sustainable, and this will allow companies to make better projections on how to handle their business, how to keep their staff appropriately, and how to make sure that they're prepared to keep things moving forward. So there's liquidity, right? I mean, at the end of the day, if there's no money to lend, that's a real problem for everyone. So I'm looking at a more stable year for 2024. I predict that interest rates being in the holding pattern will actually be very good for the industry, and we'll start to see an increase in quality. I mentioned last year, or going through with this in 2023, there's a lot of people who did not renew their license for mortgage origination. This is a good thing, because when you think about it, the people who have kept their license are good at what they do. That's great for consumers, right? If there's more quality, there's more people who are good at what they do because they've been able to succeed through this, and they've been able to not only survive but thrive in some cases. I think that that's better for the consumer, because now you're dealing with a higher quality loan officer. So that's good news and what I see coming up. Looking at home prices, unfortunately, I wish I could say I feel like they're going down. They're not. They have already started to tick back up with the interest rates dropping down. So I would expect to see that the home prices are going to continue to increase. This is what a lot of people have been talking about. When interest rates drop, you're going to see prices increase more. Well, we already saw prices increasing when interest rates were at much higher levels. And very quickly, as soon as rates came down, we've already been seeing that activity hit. So make no mistake, in 2024, it's going to be difficult. We will see multiple offer situations. We will see a position where sellers will probably give less concessions. We will see a situation where those prices will continue to increase. Hopefully affordability will be at least addressed more, and it is still a focus. It was a focus in 2023, but hopefully we'll be able to find a better balance in these markets and looking at that. So that's something that we'll look at for 2024 and how that will impact just the overall housing market. I do think we'll see more transactions, so I think we'll break that 4 million marker, maybe getting up closer to about 5 million and above, but that's really just a speculation at best. But going out and looking at it for 2024, I predict more stable interest rates, lower than what we saw for 2023. I predict higher priced properties, a continuing increase in home values, which is good for home equity. I also predict that there will be a better quality of professional in our industry as things get more difficult. I think that will allow for better professionals to come to the forefront. I predict that we're going to continue to see some interesting shakeups over this lawsuit and what that means for how real estate is bought and sold. So that'll be something that we're going to see. Now, I know that's kind of a bad prediction because I didn't really give you details on there, but outside of that, I don't really know where this is going to go. Only that the strong will survive, quality will rise, and that's what we'll see. So going into 2024, I say good news. Let's hope.